What's up, guys? Doing something a little new today. This is going to be an opinion video. I'll do these from time to time on different subjects. Today's is going to be the state of safety in dirt sprint car racing. Yesterday, for those of you who don't know, legendary Pennsylvania Posse sprint car driver Greg Hodnett had a vicious crash that ended his life. It was at a non-sanctioned, so it wasn't like a World of Outlaws or a Lucas Oil ASCS Series race, nothing like that. He just was at a local racetrack in Pennsylvania, BAPS Speedway, formerly Susquehanna Speedway, I believe, um, and had something broke on the car. He went head on into the wall. From the reports that I've seen, the way he came into the wall, the way the pit opening was, you got the wall of the racetrack and then the opening, and he, from what I heard, is that he broke and then hit the blunt end of the opening where it goes back on around the rest of the racetrack. Granted, I have not seen any video or photos of it, not that I want to, but that is what I've heard. And so that brought up something interesting to me, which is in 2018, we have now lost two big-time sprint car drivers with Jason Johnson back in July, I believe it was, and now Greg Hodnett. That's two big names. Now, there's always deaths in racing every year, but it gets interesting when it's guys that you know have the money and the cars and the right safety equipment that are still getting hurt and still dying. So to start the list of guys who have been injured or killed that are fairly significant names, in 2013, Jason Leffler was killed in a sprint car wreck. He ran NASCAR, another young guy. He was an awesome driver. He had a lot of talent, and by really no fault of his own, car got upside down, flipped up into the fence. I believe, if I remember correctly, the report was something like his seat came loose or the cage collapsed in on the seat, and that killed him. That mandated some rule changes for full containment seats into sprint cars, which a lot of guys ran anyway, which are awesome. It's been an insane amount of safety put into these cars compared to what they used to be. Because, I mean, 10, 20 years ago, sprint cars were really nothing more than four tires and a big engine. They had roll cages, but they weren't much, and the rules are getting better and better. In 2015, Kevin Swindell broke his back in a sprint car flip. Um, I believe that I didn't actually do the research on this one, but I believe that was the same year that Tony Stewart broke his leg in a sprint car crash. Everybody heard about that one. But Kevin Swindell was he's related to Sammy Swindell, who is one of the greatest of all time in open wheel sprint car and midget racing. And his car, same deal. Something happened. He got upside down, and when it landed, it didn't have any suspension underneath it anymore. And as it did, it compressed his spine together, and he broke his back. That was in 2015. Stewart broke his leg when he hit a guy halfway through a corner. Everybody saw that video. The car still flipped, but he broke his leg from probably the impact of having his feet on the pedals whenever he hit that other car. And then in 2016, the one everybody heard about was Brian Clausen, who was one of the best young midget racers of definitely my generation, probably two or three generations. The guy was awesome. He'd run a couple IndyCar races, but midget dirt racing was where his heart was, and he was on a challenge for 200 races in 1 year, and he was well on his way there when he was tragically killed in a midget crash that took his life. And in that case, can't remember how the car got upside down. Something broke. He got upside down, and then a right rear tire from another car came in and hit the halo, which is the part of the cage directly above the driver's head. And when that happened, the right rear tire came through, hit him in the head, and took his life. And then this year, Jason Johnson's wreck at a World of Outlaws tour event in, I believe it was Minnesota, where this one, yes, it had to do with the cars, but it also had somewhat to do with the track. He jumped a left rear tire with his left front tire, or a right rear tire with his left front. Car jumped up in the air, and when it came down, it flipped outside of the racetrack, went through a couple of billboards, went outside the racetrack, and landed on the cage. So, first of all, on that event, why did it not have a catch fence? Now, granted, we've seen plenty of videos, they're all over YouTube, of sprint cars getting upside down and jumping the catch fence. That's what they do. Most of them weigh somewhere between 15 and 2,500 pounds. if that much, and they have big engines. They're going 130 mile an hour, and when you get that and it eats a tire or something breaks, or it takes a huge rut, they flip pretty stupendously awesome. Yeah, honestly, they're terrific crashes, and they look horrific all the time. And most of the time, the guys can get out of them. But certain times, whatever the case may be, it's not good. And in Jason Johnson's case, the car got up in the air, through the fence, and then landed on the cage. I never actually saw a report that said what exactly it was that they determined was the cause, whether it was, whether a seat came loose and he moved in the car, whether the cage collapsed on him, whether whatever he hit in that billboard that was around the top of the racetrack killed him. I never saw anything, but that was a big name. He was a Knoxville Nationals champion. He had a young son and a wife, and that was a tragic event. And then the one that happened last night that shocked the world was Greg Hodnett. So it's just, it gets interesting when you have guys who have the best equipment out there. They're fast. They know what they're doing. They're some of the best drivers around. Like Jason Leffler, Kevin Swindell, Brian Clausen, those guys have all run NASCAR sanctioned events. Brian Clausen had run the Indy 500, I believe, twice. They're not bad drivers. It's not like they went in there and screwed up. It's something is happening here, and I think it needs to be looked at. And I'm no expert. I'm not an engineer. I am an engineering major, however, so I was an engineering major, so I understand physics a little bit. But something needs to be looked at. The World of Outlaws and I believe the Lucas Oil ASCS series, which are really the two leading sprint car series in the United States. World of Outlaws being 410s, Lucas Oil ASCS being 360s. They have already put out some rule changes, which is adding a support into the driver's halo area in between the front and the rear support. There's going to be another bar. I think it has to be within a certain, like, 19 to 24 inches off the rear, so that instead of just having the corners of the halo area supported, there'll be a spot in the middle that's supported. That's a good improvement on the halo area. I also believe that there is a tubing dimensional change that's in the works or has come out already. Again, I'm not an expert. I don't own a sprint car. I don't have to keep up with the rules. However, for the sake of this video, I did look some of them up last night. But I think we need to talk about this. I think it's something that, as ugly of a conversation as it is, it's something that needs to be looked at. Now, granted, I'm a racer. I'm a race fan. I've watched racing since as long as I can remember. And once I'm out of college and not paying for college debt, I'm going to have a race car that's going to race at a local dirt track somewhere every Friday and Saturday night. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm not opposed to the fact that everybody goes, hey, it's racing and it's inherently dangerous. And yes, it is. Absolutely, without a doubt, it's dangerous. I also personally feel that sprint cars are sprint cars because they're dangerous. Everybody goes to a sprint car race because they're dangerous. Racing would not exist if it wasn't dangerous. Think about it. Nobody goes and watches a highway. You don't do that. You go to a racetrack and you watch a guy with 800 to 900 horsepower fly around a racetrack at 140 mile an hour, and the thing's between 3/4 of a mile and a quarter mile, depending on what track they're on. So it's not something that's new. People dying in racing is not new. People have died in racing for years, and rule changes came from it. Look at NASCAR and Dale Earnhardt. He died. All of a sudden, the Hans device becomes a necessity. So it just begs the question into what is it that is really going on. Racing is dangerous, yes, but something needs to be looked at, whether it's a rule change or not. Now, think about NASCAR. Back in, I believe it was 2013 when they came out with the COT car, it was designed specifically for safety. It was a hideous, ugly car. The racing was trash, and everybody hated it. And it started out with a big wing on the back and all that stuff, and they get upside down really bad, a.k.a. Carl Edwards, Brad Keselowski, that whole thing. They all get upside down. But that car was specifically designed for safety, and that I know of, no one ever got hurt in that generation of a NASCAR. But everybody didn't do anything in the dirt world on the local scale. And there's a good reason for it. If you look at a NASCAR team, part of the reason they're so expensive is all the rules and all of the specs and all of the crash safety stuff they've got. Um, Full containment, custom form seats, um, breakaway and collapsible pieces everywhere else, the metallurgy of it all. Specific cages that have to be specific stuff, otherwise NASCAR won't certify the cage, and for good reason. NASCAR drivers don't die in wrecks. The last guy to get hurt in a NASCAR wreck that was bad enough to miss a race was Eric Almirola, and that was because he broke his back because his seat was laid back too far. I was at that race because Kansas is a local track for me. I was at that race. I saw that hit. It was horrendously terrible, and that was something that was very, very bad. Well, guess what? Now all NASCAR drivers sit up straighter. They did all the studies and they figured out why when that car landed it compressed his spine and gave him a compression fracture. That's what that was safety based off of something that happened. They're racers at the end of the day. Nobody wants to spend more money. They just want to go fast. Safety is an afterthought for most racers, and that's something that needs to change. But let's break it down more. Why is it that the local racetracks are where you see these issues, and why is it in the dirt world? I'll give you 3 good reasons. Number 1, there's not as much safety personnel. There's not as good of safety personnel, and the tracks aren't safe. Let's be real. NASCAR has paid staff members 365 days a year that are NASCAR medics. That's what they do. Granted, they're all contracted and they all wear so-and-so's medical staff. Yeah, NASCAR and IndyCar have specific medical personnel that travel with them. It's not the local EMTs. Not taking anything away from your local EMTs. I trust them with my life any day of the week. That's why I call 911 when I get hurt. But when it comes to things like racing, you need specific training. It's not just a car that got crushed that you need to cut apart and get somebody out of. No, it's a race car with specific parts and specific pieces that come apart a specific way. If you look at NASCAR, take Eric Almirola's crash, for example, at Kansas. They had specific tools to cut that cage apart, and they immediately got him basically immobilized so that he wouldn't do any more damage to his back. That doesn't happen at your local racetrack. Number 2, the tracks not being safe. Most local dirt tracks, and most local pavement tracks too, I've never seen a dirt track that has a safer barrier of any kind. I've never seen a dirt track that covers the openings of the pit road walls, ever. I have never seen a track that really has all that much safety built into it all that much, except for big tracks. Look at Wheatland, Missouri's Lucas Oil Speedway, where Forrest Lucas has brought in some of the best racing around. That's still a local track for a lot of local guys, but it's the only dirt track that I know of other than Knoxville that has a catch fence all the way around it. And I'm not talking about a little bitty chain link, nothing. No, this is like a NASCAR regulated catch fence. And guess what? People don't get hurt at Lucas Oil Speedway. There's also staff members at Lucas Oil Speedway specifically trained on how to extract people from the race cars. They also have like actual people there that are trained. It's amazing what happens when trained people get to do what they're trained for. Less people get hurt. But, you know, it costs money to do all these things. And I get that. I understand that. I'm a college student. I understand money. It costs a lot of money to do things. And it costs a lot of money to pay for those trained people to be at your racetrack every other or every week. I understand. But how many people have to die before we get the track safe? Look at Knoxville. I believe it was this year. They had somebody flip outside of the racetrack and onto a street. If you've ever seen the Knoxville Speedway, it used to sit all out way by itself, and then Knoxville built up around it. Of course, because it's basically their main calling attraction. Nobody goes to Knoxville, Iowa for anything else. But, or maybe Indiana. It's one of those two. Starts with an I. But it's got streets all around it. It's basically the middle of a town now. So when that car jumped the wall, or I believe it actually went through the wall. It didn't jump it. It went through it. It was in the middle of the street. And then Knoxville personnel were right there to help the guy out and get him out of the car. And guess what? He was fine. So how do we make tracks safer? First of all, cover the ends of blunt concrete walls. Something, water barrels, sand barrels, something. Or get rid of the blunt end of walls. Make it a one-way in, one-way out, only one gap, and make it at the exit of a corner. Say, instead of having it at the end like this Susquehanna Speedway, you go in on turn 1 and you come out of turn 2, which is awesome if you need to get into the hot pits. But it's really, really bad in a situation like what Greg Hodnett had, where he went into the corner, broke something in the steering, and guess what he hit? The blunt end of a concrete wall. There's nothing that the car can do that's going to make that safe. There's no way. You cannot have a race car like that hit at an angle like that and not have somebody get hurt. It just doesn't work because it's going to move. He's going 130, 140 mile an hour. The car is going to destroy itself. And if it hits something that hard at that angle, there's nothing you can do about it. And it's ugly and it sounds terrible. But that's just the truth of it. There's absolutely nothing that a safer car would have done for Greg Hodnett last night. A safer track may have saved his life. Because if they have water barrels or anything else, or that opening isn't even there, he doesn't hit the blunt end of a wall. He hits water barrels or the curvature of a wall, which we've all seen. Basically, everybody that's ever run a race car has hit the wall going into a corner for one reason or another. And 9 times out of 10, they get out of the car. Even if they get upside down, like sprint cars are so good at doing, they get out of the car 9 times out of 10. He hit the blunt end of a wall. You're very rarely going to see anybody get out of the car with that, especially a sprint car. So the tracks need to get safer. The cars need to get safer, but to a point, the cars are probably about as safe as they're going to be to still be themselves. But finally, the racing community needs to make safety a bigger issue. Because until the racers bring it up, the tracks won't do anything. Until the racers bring it up, the series won't do anything. What has to happen, what has to be done, is the drivers, the racers, the teams, the crews, those big money guys that can afford all the good stuff, the small town guy at your local dirt track that runs there every Friday night, they need to bring up safety. Because if it's not there, people are going to die. It's just the truth. I can't think of the guy's name. There was a late model driver a few years ago. I can't remember if it took his life, but I know he didn't race anymore. Got into the corner, flipped his late model up onto its top, and the thing burst into flames. If I remember right, it burned him to death. Because nobody had a fire extinguisher. It's a racetrack. Nobody there had a fire extinguisher. That is stupid. That is plain stupidity. You cannot race cars and expect nothing bad is going to happen. That's why you put walls and fences and you move the fans back and all that fun stuff. The guys are going 120, 130, 140 mile an hour at most of your local 3/8 mile dirt tracks. But we do nothing to be prepared in the event that there is an issue. That has to change. That's the only way we can fix this, is safer tracks. Safer cars will help, for sure. But there's only so much you can do, especially in terms of sprint cars. Safer tracks is where it's at. So there's never anyone you can necessarily blame in a racing accident that took somebody's life. You can't blame anybody for what happened to, say, for example, Dale Earnhardt. It's a racing deal. It happens. You accept that risk when you put the helmet on and you strap into the car. That's something that goes through every racer's head. But you have to have safe tracks. Do absolutely everything you can to negate the fact that racing is inherently dangerous, with it still being racing. Don't slow the cars down. Don't do anything like that. Don't go, oh, we can't run 410 sprint cars anymore because a couple of them got hurt or died. You can't do that, because if you look at them, 360 sprint cars go exactly the same speed as 410s. They just do it in a lot less exciting of a way, really. It's the same way with NASCAR. Slow the cars down. Why? So they don't hit the brakes as much? The safety comes in the equipment and the tracks, not the cars. And that's my opinion.